Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
Welcome to Just Plain Theology from Rome, Sweet Rome. This is a program offered by Natalia Yuzian on location in Rome. Natalia, good to have you back again this week.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be here. Great to hear your voice.
I guess we haven't really had any communications problems. It's been a piece of cake pretty much, huh?
But yeah, so far so good. This is great. You know, when technology works, it's wonderful. Yeah, absolutely.
So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, let's see. Today we can talk about, I think it'd be nice to talk about charity right before we head into Christmas. On a lighter note, I can just say, it's funny. There was a story that came out that I saw on, I forgot what news station, some internet, news thing, whether it was Yahoo or something, I can't remember. And it talked about the ugliest Christmas tree in the world. And they had the one in Piazza Venezia in Italy. And I thought, I just walked by that thing. I said, they noticed. And because you've got the beautiful tree at the Vatican, but then you have one in Piazza Venezia, one of the busiest and most congested with tourist area in all of Rome, in front of the altar to the Republic. And this poor thing, it looked like, the Charlie Brown Christmas tree on steroids. It was just, it's very big, but it just looked a little sad. And then someone threw lights up on there, just a few of them, And I saw it, and I went, could they not have done a little bit more with this, And then I see it in the news, and I was like, oh, dear, they saw it. Well, I walked by it today, and they spruced it up a little bit. They put a big lit garland around it, a big star and everything. I wasn't there last week, okay? So someone must have seen that news story and been embarrassed. I think they put more decorations on there. So the decorations are up, and I've seen more street lights up with Christmas lights. So it actually is looking more festive this year than I noticed last year. I don't know if it's just because I'm walking around a bit more in different neighborhoods and I'm seeing it. That's probably more it. It's like I said, it's not like, Northern Europe, but still it's you get the feeling Christmas is in the air. But, and I went to the Vatican the other day and saw the beautiful nativity scene that's life-size and, in St. Peter's Square, and then the Christmas tree, it's beautiful. So that part's nice. And as beautiful as the weather was last week is as miserable as it was today. Praise God in all things. It's raining, it's cold, it's like 32 degrees this morning. I thought, sometimes with weather like that, you almost feel happy because you think, if I can get through this, it's okay, because for this part of the world, it's about as bad as it gets. It's raining, it's windy, it's cold, it's,
Yeah.
And somehow, if you can manage to crack a smile and be happy, and you'll be okay. So,
how are you handling? How's your apartment coming along?
It's fine. I don't spend that much time here, so I don't devote a lot to decorating it up. It's a place to live. But the main concern is just trying to keep warm while I'm in here, because it's so electricity and gas is so expensive here, and so your utility bills will double in the winter because of the heating. And this is just, a little, I'm in a studio. I'm not in a big place. And
yeah.
So you don't keep it on during the day. You turn it off. So you come in and it's cold and you turn it on. It takes a while for it to crank up. And, so the big concern. And then, of course, is keeping the place dry, because in a humid climate like this, when it's cold, mold is always a problem. So you have to make sure that, you keep
good old mold is still a problem, huh?
Good old mold, yeah, grows on you. Yeah, it's just terrible.
Well, hopefully not on you.
Hopefully not on me. I hope not. It's but it can be very problematic. So anyway, but all is well. Rome is wonderful, and Christmas is coming, and you can feel it in the air, and it's not that's nice.
When you talk about scrawny trees and bad Christmas trees. When I was raising my 5 girls, I was expected to bring in a Christmas tree, and I had no tools, I had no saws, no hammers, no nothing, So I'd bring the tree in, And my wife would say, "Oh, that's too small." That was one year. Then the next year, "Oh, that's too tall." Then the next year it was, "That's too fat." Then the next year it was, "That's too skinny."
Oh dear.
So I went through the whole 9 yards. Finally, I said, "That's it. I'm getting a artificial Christmas tree." One of those silver ones, you know?
Oh, right.
And we would just put it up in the attic, and then every Christmas we'd bring it down, and everybody was happy.
Well, in our house, we could not. There was no way we weren't going to have a real tree. It had to be done. And I remember there were a couple of years now. My younger sister she's got big eyes for stuff, you know. So whether it's getting a sundae someplace or getting a Christmas tree, the bigger the better, you know. And so she always wanted and we would spend hours looking for trees sometimes. Go to, Christmas tree farm and look for one. Here's my poor father. God bless his soul. I mean, he would go and he'd have his saw and he'd ready to, take one down. And I remember one year we went from farm to farm until we find the perfect tree. Okay, fine. So now the deal was once it got in the house and it was finally, invariably we had to cut the thing down because it was so big, so it had to be cut down again once because we couldn't get it to stand up in the house. And the decorating was left. I scrammed. I did not want to know about the decorating because it just got, how it gets. It can get tense, right? So everyone's got their idea of where it should go. And it suddenly becomes very frustrating. And so I just I removed myself from the picture and said, you know what, I'll take things down because no one likes to do that. So I said, okay, I'll do that because at least that's peaceful.
Idea.
I don't, at some point that became my thing. So.
You should see Middletown. They have this park here,
Uh-huh.
Oh, it's just beautiful. They've got every tree with lights on it and a huge Christmas tree. I don't know. Are you familiar with that?
I've seen it in the past. Yeah. Driven by it. Yeah.
Wow.
Beautiful.
They go all out.
There's something about Christmas lights. It's about that light and the darkness. I mean, you think about darkness of any kind, all you need is one light, one small light to make a difference. That's it.
Beautiful.
Just one, and that there's something about that. The hope that's in that small light in the darkness, means that even that hasn't been overcome. Now we were talking about this in a class today. The professor was speaking about the nativity icon in the Eastern churches, and I may have mentioned this on one of our shows. I can't remember. But anyway, in that icon, it's very different from the Latin Rite imagery for Christmas. You've got a stark black background with some rocks in the back, so it looks like a cave. And you've got the Blessed Mother there, and you've got little baby Jesus all wrapped up in almost glowing white clothes. Like the white is so prominent against the black. The contrast strikes you.
Yeah.
And the professor was making the point about how he's the light in the darkness. The darkness does not overcome it. And that's why it looks that way. It's almost like there's a glow around him. And it's beautiful, beautiful imagery because, and I thought, well, what it made me think about the different kinds of darkness people can encounter in their lives one way or another, whether it's through our own faults, whether it's because of something someone has done to us, and the darkness has engulfed us in some way. Anyone who's had difficulties, personal sin, your own, someone else's, whatever, you find your place. People who have addictions, people who have difficult family situations, in their relations, perhaps in their families with their spouses, and it seems like there's no way out, and it just seems like darkness is engulfing you. And that hope that one light can bring, and anyone as a Christian who's really living out their life and they're partaking of the sacraments and they're living it out can bring that to somebody. You don't know when, you don't know how. It could be something as nice as a smile. It could be a kind act. And you just see that suddenly there's a kind of hope. I had a very small one today. They have here in Rome, they have these street vendors who sell, anything from batteries to sweaters to shoes. You name it, and you don't always ask where the stuff comes from, but you just, there they are, and it's legit, the ones who give you receipts and stuff. So I bought a couple of little Christmas-type bags I needed for gifts, and I had overpaid the guy by €1. I didn't realize it. €1. At this point, it's like $1. And here, everything's in that denomination is given in coins, so you don't notice sometimes. And I walked away, and he kept calling after me, and I turned back and goes, "Oh, you gave me an extra one." And it was, in a way, kind of shocking, because sometimes people have the impression that these people are there out just, to make a buck whatever way they can.
Yeah.
And there's another big difference between these groups. Now, they're just selling their stuff, but there's usually it's very clear that they're not Christian. They're Muslims, usually. Not always, but usually. And so there can be a tendency to instinctivly almost see them as someone other in some way, right? And see the difference rather than any kind of likeness. And, the difference in the religion is huge, obviously. But there it was. And that act of kindness, and it was just so spontaneous, and it was so sincere, and I thanked him for his honesty. I said, it would have been very easy. I completely didn't even see it. Over one year, big deal, right? And that was just a beautiful, small act. And yesterday, I ran into another one, and he was asking me, I was buying a small gift for somebody, and he asked me, he goes, "What does that word mean, Natale?" Because here they say Buon Natale for Christmas, and it means like the good birth. I mean, we would translate it as Merry Christmas, but Natale would mean the birth, the birth, and of course the birth of Jesus. And so I was explaining that to him, and he said, "Oh, so it's his birth?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh," he goes, "Are you Catholic?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Are you Orthodox?" Because there are a lot of Slavic people here who are Orthodox, and if you look like you belong to that group, people generally assume that you are. I said, no, I'm Catholic. And I said, "Are you Catholic?" Because I thought maybe he's Indian, Eastern, right, like Sierra Malabar or something. And he said, no, I'm Muslim. And I said, "Oh," I said, "Well, have you ever thought about it?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know." And he goes, well, what does it mean that he was born?" I said, "Well, he always existed as the son of the Father." I said, "But he took on human flesh, and we celebrate that birth of him being born as God and man. Completely God, completely man." And I'm just watching this, seeing whether he's asking me these questions because he wants me to buy some more stuff, or is it because he's hoping I won't notice, that I don't have my change back in my hand yet. I'm suspicious, because you have to be careful. Well, but you're suspicious. He wasn't. It didn't seem like it. He was actually fine. He gave me everything that was supposed to. But the fact that he asked was intriguing, because you don't know if someone's being sincere. You hope so. You hope there's goodwill behind it. But you don't know, because he didn't say it within earshot of the other guys there, or they're just hoping to make you a repeat customer, because there are lots of other vendors who sell the same stuff on the same strip at this flea market. You don't know, but it doesn't matter. He asked, so I answered. And I said, "So have you ever thought about it?" And then he looked down and kind of shook his head, half smiling and almost embarrassed, and said, No, I don't have a head for thinking about that stuff. I said, "Well," I said, I know some people who were Muslim. I said, they converted recently. And I said, he had a dream that Christ appeared to him. And he looked down and he said, Yeah. And he said, "Yeah, I've heard that happens to people." He goes, "I've actually heard about that." I said, "It's true." I said, "If he calls, listen," something like that. And then, it just said goodbye, and I left. And, you don't know what would come of this or whatever, but I thought it was funny that he asked me, I just thought that's strange. So, you answer, that's okay, fine. And, you wonder, maybe someday God will show you if it meant anything. If not, I don't know. But the fact that he asked, I thought was interesting, and that he wanted to know. I think he must not have made a connection between buying all the presents and what is it about this birth, because that's such a big deal. Maybe he's thinking that we think of Christ just as a prophet, because he said something about, well, we have a prophet too. I was like, well, this is a little bit more than that. We're talking about God-made man. It's a little different, but I didn't get into it there, because again, you don't know what it wasn't the time or the place, it seemed, but it's a little something I dropped. So you don't know, but
that was good though.
Yeah, you don't know. You don't know. It was curious to me. I wonder, what does darkness mean for them? For this man, what would that have meant for him?
Yeah.
Would that have meant
the light? And then what's the light?
Right, what's the light? And I said, I wonder what the light would have been, because with Christianity, the light has to do with humanity being redeemed by being assumed up into divinity in Jesus Christ. And what he assumed, he redeemed. And so we're free as Christians. Our religion is not one of slavish obedience. On the contrary, the essence of a life of lived in charity and partaking of divine love is one of being in friendship with God. It's being in communion with God, who's opened the door for this. He's elevated our nature so that we're made capable of that. You know.
Well, in yesterday's second reading, though, it starts out with Paul, slave of Jesus Christ. But see, this is chosen slavery.
Yeah, and also you have Christ saying, "I know I call you friends," right?
Right.
So, I mean, chosen slavery, and I think sometimes there's hyperbole. You know, we have to look at it in various ways, because sometimes that wording might not work with everybody.
Well, someplace it'll say servant. It'll say servant or
right,
slave.
Right, and it's the idea of wanting to. I mean, people who are in love, you know, in days gone by would have said, you know, I'm your slave. I'll do what you want. No, because it's the essence of that is devotion to the person. Is having your eyes on them and seeing what is it my beloved would wish and want to do that very thing. In that sense, you know, of course, you would do that and you do whatever, but it would never. I mean, you're not working against God's will when you're in communion with him, or you don't want to. There might be a moment of weakness. Hopefully your will is in such a place that you're striving to do his will. And as you grow in the virtues and in this life of grace, that becomes easier and easier, so that it's less and less of a fight. Not that it's gone altogether. There's always going to be something to work on. But that in general you start thinking along the lines of what would be pleasing to God, and not in a way that causes such turmoil interiorly. I mean, initially that's going to be the case, perhaps, sure, especially if anyone's lived a life that was not in concert with what God would want for us. Then there is going to be
the description I like is like in fancy restaurants where the waitress or the waiter is always looking at the maitre d'.
Yeah.
And the maitre d' doesn't have to say anything. I mean, they have signs and they just nod or, you know,
right,
or blink an eye or something like that. And,
right,
but they're always watching, and that's what us with Jesus. We're always watching to see what's going to please him.
Right. Right, and being aware and attuned, and after a while that gets more fine-tuned, that ability to sense what would be the right thing,
right.
What it seems like, you know, the Holy Spirit's doing, it's so far as you can tell. It's always mysterious, you know. God's ways are often, I mean, they're not our ways, and sometimes it's done in a great darkness as far as we're concerned, and we're just called to trust. We don't always.
The darkness I like is the one on Easter Vigil.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole church is completely black.
Mm-hmm.
And it's completely black, and then the candle comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody lights their candle from that light.
Right.
And pretty soon it's such beautiful, you know.
It is, and it's amazing. Again, you got this completely dark church, especially if there's absolutely no light. And that's hard today with all kinds of electricity plugged in or whatever. But, you know, just imagine it's completely dark. Just the one candle changes everything. One light changes everything. Everything. You know? That thought amazes me.
Okay, so Christmas stories.
Yeah, you said you had a good one.
Yeah. Oh, this is beautiful.
Tell me.
This couple, the wife was getting ready to go to Mass on Christmas Eve, and her husband didn't go to Mass with her, but she said, "Oh, why don't you come with me at least this time? You know, Christmas Eve. And he says, nah, I don't believe in all that Jesus stuff and all that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so she trudges through the snow and goes to there's kind of a little bit of a storm going on, but so she goes to Mass, and he's there in the house, and he's looking out the window, and he sees these birds in his driveway. And they're kind of huddled up because it's snowing and it's blowing, and they're all huddled up. And he says, you know what? He says, I'm going to go out there and open up the garage. You know, and it's a heated garage. So I'm going to go open that up. And they'll go in that garage and get warm. So he goes out there, and he's trying to shoo them in the garage, right? They don't go in the garage. They just keep flying away. There's no way he can get them in that heated garage where they'd feel so good. Mm-hmm. And he says, you know what? He says, I wish I could be one of them so I could tell them.
Oh, what an insight!
Just like Jesus.
Maybe that's Jesus stuff, right?
But the light went on.
The
light went on.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a beautiful story, though?
It is a beautiful story. I love that. I wish I could be one of them and let them know.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. There it is. That's what it is. Mm-hmm.
You said you had one, too.
Oh, I'm trying to remember what... I was asking because I love hearing about various Christmas stories, and I've got to think back and see.
But you wanted to get to charity too. You wanted to talk about because you've just recently been studying what they call what do they call it?
The three theological virtues, right? The theological virtues because they're divine and that God is the object and the end, and He has to give them. It's nothing you can acquire for yourself. So it's a gift from God. Charity is the one that we studied last, and it's probably the one we're going to spend. We spent an awful lot of time on faith because it's so foundational, but we didn't do that much on hope. But charity is what we've been spending a lot of time on, and we will until the end of the semester. The most beautiful thing, what keeps coming back to me as we're doing this, is how the professor's mentioning the friendship with God, because this is what St. Thomas Aquinas uses to describe what this is at its core, and because it has to do with this communion that we have with God. But you need other things, like, for example, you need to be on the same level, right? Now, we're not, obviously, by nature on the same level with God, but Christ in assuming humanity, wow. And then with the sacraments, our nature's been elevated. And so there's now this possibility. And then there's an entering into communion, and it has to be reciprocated. So friendship is a perfect, a perfect hermeneutic, which means, interpretive key of looking at this. And I love that, because when we say charity, it sounds like you're talking about, to modern ears anyway, a philanthropic act. It's just deeds and giving money and maybe some time, maybe giving your old clothes to Goodwill, maybe, giving somebody your old computer when you're going to get a new one for Christmas, whatever. Donating your car, what have you. And that is a charitable act, and it could certainly, fit the bill. I mean, that's fine, but it's not enough to look at it that way, obviously. And the Greeks had lots of words for love. We don't have many in English. And so we have to do some explaining when we talk about the love that God has for us, that we have for God, that we have for others, that we have for things. The same word for loving a gelato and loving God. Okay, well, you got to qualify that a little bit, on either side. And you distinguish between the love that parents have for their children, the love that spouses have for each other, that passionate kind of love that's rooted in the senses, the love that lovers have for each other, that has their eyes focused on each other, not so much outward until another comes into the picture. And then they're both suddenly looking at this other being, and all three sharing it. And this is a beautiful model of the life of the Trinity. One way of looking at this communion of love. And you can see that the higher that love goes, the more it's outward looking and giving of itself. But it doesn't lose any of the other loves that are, quote unquote, below it. You know, it's almost like you would look at the incarnation assuming humanity into the divinity. Nothing of the humanity is lost in doing so. On the contrary, it's elevated. And so with the lower, quote unquote, loves that you have for, you know, on the sense level, and then you can have, you know, kind of sensual love for people. You can have an affinity with people, let's say, you work with because you share something in common, the love of spouses, love of children, all these other loves that even occur on a natural level would be assumed up into this love that is given by God when we're talking about the theological virtue of charity and this kind of love of friendship with God. They're all brought up into this. They're not annihilated. They're not suppressed or repressed. They are to be taken up into this and assumed up into it, and then they're rightly ordered so that you can rightly love things and not abuse that love, like love for gelato. Hey, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. And so when your love is rightly ordered and it's God is the object and you're in communion with God and you have this relation of friendship with Him, all these others, they're put in their place. They're not gotten rid of. And I think that's a hopeful thing. Sometimes the thought of charity brings to mind an idea of sort of repressing some of these lower kinds of love because somehow, especially if there's an emotional element involved, very often it's said, well, it's a higher kind of love if the emotions are not involved and it's purely on the level of the will. And to stop there is not doing justice to love, because ultimately what will perfect a moral act is when the emotions come along. And so you want them to be guided, well-guided, well-trained, however you want to, well-educated. There are different ways of talking about it. But the ideal act of love is going to be one where the emotions are along with it. Now, it doesn't mean that makes it a good act, because often they're not going to be there. So you can have an act of love without them. But ultimately, you should be able to bring that along. So let's take an example like Mother Teresa, for example, right? And caring for someone in the streets in the worst kind of physical condition you can imagine. Now, on the sensitive level, you can imagine the repugnance that's there. But even though you see what is repugnant in somebody in terms of their physical condition, she's seen people who have had maggots in their wounds. They've been so neglected and left just to die there in the streets. Takes them off the street, cares for them. Someone would say it like she loves them, except you can take out the word like, because she really does. And although it is an act of the will, you can bet that they felt the love of the sisters. And she used to tell her sisters, if you can't smile when you're with the poor, it's better that you don't go to them today, because you can do the mechanical act of charity without that affectivity, that tender affection for them. But how do you think it's going to be received? And so you could see how she wanted to make sure that part of them was cultivated also. I mean, think about yourself and someone doing a kind act for you. If someone does it grudgingly, sometimes you just say, don't bother, it's okay. But when someone does it with a kindness that is being demonstrated to you, that's a beautiful thing. And even if it takes a little force initially, really, that's the kind of thing you can also grow in, so it becomes very natural and spontaneous. And that will perfect the act. And I think that's something that gets lost sometimes. We have this idea that it has to be purely an act of the will, and if there is any of the emotion involved, that makes it less of an act. It's going to make it a better one. But it takes, it takes time to get to that point, because if you haven't been living that life of charity, and that means God's very life living in you, elevating you so you can do this, then you may not be used to it, and it is going to cost you. But that's a time of education. It's pedagogical. It's meant to train you. And then once that habit is there and it becomes easier, it's like anything else that becomes a habit. It becomes easy. Anyone who's studied music of any kind, practice, practice, practice. Give a presentation, you practice what you want to do, not to the point where you can't be spontaneous in the moment, but what allows you to be spontaneous is the practice that you've had so that you know what you're doing, and then you can play. But if you don't have that discipline behind you, then you can't. And it's the same thing morally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the idea that it's got to be so cold and that makes it a better act, I think, is horrible. You know who wrote about that a lot was Dietrich von Hildebrand. In a wonderful book called The Heart, Human and Divine Affectivity. And what I liked about that book was he talked about very clearly about the different ways that one can be almost crippled emotionally because you're not able to engage the emotions in this act. That doesn't mean that someone's always crying or laughing or joking or anything, but there is going to be something warm and attractive about a person and their personality who's living this life of charity. It is going to come out. It is going to show. And it doesn't mean that it's they're being obsequious. It doesn't mean that they're falling all over the people they're trying to help, but it'll show. It'll just come out in a very natural way, the way they are, given their personality and their backgrounds, their cultural upbringing and all of that. But it's meant to be there, and that makes it very rich. When someone has a very rich emotional life, when they're living in this life of grace, you can sense it. It's palpable. You can feel it. It makes you want to be around them. That's what I found in the past, where someone who represses that and does things because they're supposed to, acts of charity, and sometimes it becomes very impersonal in a way that almost objectifies the person you're helping, I think. Because you're helping them because it is a good thing. You're kind of forgetting about the person involved. It's almost like you're turning towards yourself and doing this. I'm going to do the good act because it's a good thing to do, but it's me doing it, and you're not engaging with this person. Something there is it's unappealing to do that. I think that you might want to look at why. But anyway, Dietrich von Hildebrand talks about the different kinds of ways you can repress that emotional part of you for whatever reason, and sometimes how that looks is when someone does wonderful acts of charity, philanthropic acts, but they're done at a distance, and they hold the actual person that they're helping at bay. And so they don't actually get involved in any way, right? So you can give millions of dollars to do something, and that's great, build a wing on a hospital, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But, and it's wonderful, and you need that to be done. It doesn't mean, though, that they're engaged personally. Necessarily. They've done a great act, but it may not be the same as someone who just smiles at another person because they look like they need it and they actually want to give them warmth and love in that moment, as fleeting as it is. You don't know how God's going to judge these things, You may not want to. You might reach out, a beggar on the street who's begging for money, and you don't know how they're going to use it and whatever, but maybe you're just not called to figure them out. Maybe you're just called to do what you can do in the moment, and sometimes all you can do is give them, whatever changes in your pocket. I don't know. But you give it to them, you hold, give just their hand a little squeeze and a smile, and actually look in their eyes and look at them as a human being, and that can make a difference. You don't know. Even if it's just for the moment, you don't know. And it's not necessarily up to you to figure that out. It may be up to you just to help in that moment, give them what you can.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's great. I know I've experienced a lot of that since I started going over to that nursing home.
Oh, yeah? Yeah.
Where when I first got there was a lot of people sitting around, with their arms folded. And not a lot, but there's a few. And you kind of got the idea that, they're saying, who does this guy think he is, or what's he going to do, And then as you just continue to love them and show your interest in them and so forth, they change.
They do. Bob, you're right, and I noticed that. You remember when we went, it was 2 years ago, on Christmas Day, and we had a Mass at that nursing home. This is in Willimantic, Connecticut.
Yeah.
Right. That was the first time, wasn't it, in a long time that they've had a Mass?
That was Christmas. That was Christmas Day, the first Mass they ever had there on Christmas Day, because it was one of those nursing homes that's kind of neglected.
Right. And I remember
they weren't receiving communion. They didn't have masses or anything like that.
That's awful. Yeah. So I remember when we went, and it was such a gift to have been there for that. It was so beautiful. Yeah. And that in and of itself was a beautiful thing, and it was a great thing to do for these people. And you knew deep down inside somewhere it's going to affect them, even though they're not physically capable of showing it, but it doesn't matter. They're humans, they have souls, and this is going to have a good effect one way or another. You just believe that that's the case and leave the rest to God. And then we went back this summer, and I noticed the difference in the same people that I recognized from the first time we were there, and how they reacted to you and everything. They were much more alive, and they were engaged. I mean, it was really, there was something that had come alive there, Bob, I have to say. So you saw it week to week, and you may not see the difference so much, but I noticed a big difference from the first day to then, a year and a half later.
Well, this one of the nurses there, Paul Lawrence is a nurse there, and he said after we had been there a while, there was this one guy, I think he was in his 90s. He never heard him speak before. And after that, after a bit, he started to talk. He never talked.
Wow.
I mean, it's just little things like that. But see, that's the kind of thing you're talking about. That's the real stuff.
Yeah.
Before I was a Christian, I used to do a lot of good things. It was always for me. And it wasn't until I found Jesus that I did it for Jesus then,
Right.
And so it was different. It was different, and it comes out different.
It does. I think I agree with that. I think when you're doing it for Christ, and then you're doing, and again, there's always going to be a time of training involved spiritually, in the sense that it may feel strange, you may feel funny about it, whatever, but it's the right thing to do. But after a while, it becomes spontaneous, and the love, you actually do feel this love for the people. You really do. It comes along.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
It doesn't have to be there. You can do the good thing without it. It's still a good thing. And you don't do it for the good feeling, certainly, because then you're doing it for yourself completely. But it is there after a time, as it should be. And it's wonderful to do what you do at that place. Like when we had that Mass at Christmas Day. And
when I started there, I didn't know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I just went there and just let the Spirit, nothing big. It's not big stuff.
No, it's not. That's the other thing. It's not big stuff. You just go there, you pray with them, or you pray the rosary, sing a few songs. Yeah. But you get to know their names. You get to know them. The personalist part of this is important. I think.
Well, I woke one morning and the Lord said, you should have name tags for all of them. And then you get to know the names better, see. So I can walk in there and say, hi, Bill, hi, Mike, hi, Joe, hi, Lucille.
Yes.
And you know all of them.
Yes.
So it becomes like a big family,
Yes, it does. And people respond to having their names called. You have a name. You're not just a thing, you're certainly not a number. And so when someone calls you by your name, you perk up, you say, yes, that's me, that's who I am. They've seen me, they've seen my person, not just me as somebody sitting here in a chair, being, have on my medication and maybe not responding like I would have if this was 30 years ago. But somewhere deep inside, I think they must sense that they are being seen as the persons they are individually.
Right. That's right. When I first taught Sunday school, or CCD, I started, I think, with the fourth grade, and the only thing I said was, I'm going to love those kids. I don't care what they do. Okay? I'm going to love those kids. I don't care what they do. I mean, I had to keep order and things like that,
Right.
But at the end of the year, when they all left for the final time, after the final class, I actually felt love for them. for each one. It really was there, When I started, it was just I made the statement that I'm going to love them. I don't care what they do. Well, then they asked, would you teach the 5th grade too? And the 6th grade, and the 7th grade, and the 8th grade. In you, Bob?
How much love did you have in you?
See, I mean, it works.
It does. It does.
See, St. John of the Cross, I love this thing he said. He said, if you don't find love, okay, if you'll put love there, you'll find love.
Right.
And it works.
Now
it works.
That could be a very difficult thing for somebody, because they could say, well, if I don't have it, if I don't find love, well, what can I put in if I don't feel? Because again, we tend to think that it's a feeling, and they'll say, well, if I don't feel it, I put it in. It's like, well, it's not. It is, it actually comes from the will. But also, if you feel like you're running on empty, again, we're not relying on ourselves. We're talking about something that's coming from God. It's God's love in us. So knowing that if you're called to something, and, it's a call. It's not like you're going out and choosing. But let's say you are actually asked to do something, and it is a call of some sort. You can have absolute confidence that God will give you what you need to do it. So that if the love is needed there, he will definitely give it, because that's what he is love. And so he gives himself to us, and so he will give what you need in the moment. It doesn't mean you're going to know early on or ahead of time, okay, the bank's full, I'm good, I can go. No, it's going to be in the moment that, and that takes it takes trust. You have to make acts of trust that he will actually do that, but he will. And it'll be there. Yeah, you're right.
But like you say, it isn't a feeling, but it becomes a feeling. That's what happened with me.
Well, the feelings come along, eventually, because, you got to train your will to do certain things. Training may not be the right word, but anyway, but you do some things. I mean, imagine someone who's had a big conversion, right? And they've been living for themselves and just seeking pleasure, what have you. Then, for however it happens, conversion, right? They turn to God, and they're partaking of the sacraments, they're doing everything they're supposed to be doing and all of that. That they still have bad habits, and you change habits by acts. You have to act. So if you've just been living for yourself, then you have to start acting, making acts where you're not just doing things for yourself, and that's going to hurt at first. It's like, imagine someone training in a gym, and they haven't been working out for a long time, and then they start going back. There's going to be, but eventually it gets easier. Your muscles build, and then eventually it does actually become a joy. So let's say someone starts training. Now, you ran marathons. You can start running for something. It's not going to be pleasant at first, but after a while, there is something to feeling so good when you're running, especially in certain weather. It feels great.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you don't feel anything. It's just you're like a car. You're like in a car, only you're running. Yeah,
and you just go, and that's analogous to the spiritual life as well.
That's because of the training.
Right, exactly. Because of the training, it makes it easier. Without the training, it would still be a chore. It would still be laborious. But after you've been trained for a while, then you can see how it comes along, so that someone can actually say there's a runner's high. Well, someone who's never ran before, and, they've never run, and they've never gone two blocks running, never mind a marathon. The first month or two, it's going to be a little rough, It ain't going to feel good. But eventually, the muscles get strengthened, and it actually does feel good. And it doesn't mean that the work objectively is any less. In fact, you're running more than you did the first 2 months. But you're in better shape, and so you can do more spiritually when you're in better spiritual shape as well, and it'll feel good because you're doing God's will. Now again, you're not doing it for the feeling, and the feeling doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. It's just that you get to a point they're supposed to come along. Let's put it that way. That's the way the whole thing is supposed to work. Eventually.
Listen to what Peter Kreeft says. He says, finally, there is the equally mind-boggling mystery of the intrinsic paradox of agape. we didn't mention much about agape, but that's kind of what we're talking about, right?
Yep. Yes.
Somehow in agape, you give yourself away, not just your time or work or possessions or even your body. You put yourself in your own hands and hand it over to another. And when you do this unthinkable thing, another unthinkable thing happens. You find yourself in losing yourself. You begin to be, when you gave, it says you begin to be when you give yourself away. You find that a new and more real self has somehow been given to you. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
When you are a donor, you mysteriously find yourself a recipient, the very gift that you gave away. And that's it.
That's it. That's it. And that's
Isn't
and you know
beautiful?
that is beautiful, and that's the call of every human being, is to make a sincere gift of yourself. There was a philosopher named David Schindler, and one of the things he talked about Christ's love on the cross. You could even say just the incarnation of descending from heaven and taking on human flesh, and that it's not that he was not in his acts. He was. You could say he's completely in them. It's like he emptied himself, but by giving all of himself, but all of himself, including the desire to give himself and all of the affectivity that his human nature would have had, all of it was given, so that in giving of himself, it was that act is full of himself, right? That's the only way you can be full of yourself, is in giving yourself away fully. Then it's okay.
Yeah, it's just the opposite of what we think.
Right, exactly, and hence that it being better to give than to receive, but you do receive in the giving, and that's the secret. That's the part that's not always told. You have to figure that one out for yourself sometimes, but in the giving. But it's not always easy. It's not always easy.
Did you ever hear of Gabrielle Bosses? She wrote a book called He and I.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was just reading one of her entries here on this business of love.
Mm-hmm.
Lord, I rack my brains to find ways of loving you and don't succeed. Now this is about loving God. I am all simplicity, says God. Love me simply. When you think about me feeling sorry at not being able to do better, you love me. When you act rather from duty than from inclination, you love me.
Mm-hmm.
When you belittle yourself in your own eyes and before others, you love me. When you want to pray and you deplore the distractions that make your thoughts wander, you love me. When you hunt for words without being able to express your desires, you love me. When you forgive a wounding remark, when you give pleasure for the sake of giving me pleasure, when you cease to think of yourself in order to try to reach me, when you attempt to leave everything as though it were the day of your death, when in thought you join the angels and saints like one who arrives ahead of time, and when in the evening you welcome your tomorrow morning that will unite us, you love me. It's all very different from what you thought you ought to do in order to love me. Oh, my little girl, simplify yourself sweetly in my presence. You're loved, wide awake. You know very well that I am always there. That's a little different. I mean, talking about that relationship with God and loving God. How do we love God?
Well, but if we're talking about this love with God as being friendship, you think about how you are with friends, and what it would mean, and what wishing well for your friend, for example. Yeah. It's not just a love of concupiscence, where it's based on your sense of nature, and all that. No, you wish them well, but the idea of simplicity, I think, just means a kind of single-heartedness and not overthinking it. But the fact, it's true. I mean, if your friend was with you and, you met once a week for coffee and they were distracted, if they didn't feel bad about being distracted, you would wonder about that. But if they did, what would you do? You'd probably say, well, what's wrong? You talk about it like that. That's what friends do. And so we could do that with God as well. It's like the distraction itself can become the locus of communion also.
Well, it's like when you fall in love with your wife, like a man, when he falls in love with his wife, and the wife loves the man, and they're on a trip, and they're not talking to each other, but they're not uncomfortable,
right?
Because they're just loving to be with each other.
That's right,
and that's like adoration, like you say, you can just be silent before God.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that man in that little town? They said, "What do you do when you go to adoration?" "Well, I look at God, and God looks at me." And
yeah,
you can't get any more simple than that.
No, you can't. And it reminds me of a couple I knew from my parish who just had one of the most amazing marriages I've ever seen. I mean, they're an inspiration, and both of the couple, they're wonderful. They're very faithful people. They love God, and in a very sincere and complete way, in an intelligent way, with full freedom. They're incredible. I remember asking them once. I said, "Well, I think they've passed a 50-year mark of being married at this point, raised 4 sons." And I said, "Well, what is the secret to your marriage? Do you think? Like, what would you say has been the key?" And they would talked about various things in their lives and say, "Yeah, our friends remark on how we can drive such long distances and want to together rather than fly. Why would you want to spend so much time together?" They said, "We like to, we chat, but sometimes we don't talk, and we just like to be with each other." So after 50 years, they can still say this. So, wow, I didn't think it existed, And but they said the key for them though was communication. They talked. I mean, they actually talked to each other, not about things first, but to each other. And looking in each other's eyes and talking to each other, but and they daily, all the time, and they enjoyed that. They actually enjoyed it, and so that was a big strength. But the other was also, if they did run into conflict, as you do inevitably, they were so serious, and it was instinctive on both their parts to step away from things if it got to the point where they thought they might say something to hurt the other. So, of course, they never argued in front of the children either. That was the other thing. But they sensed when things might be getting to, emotions are getting heated, and something hurtful might be said. Just the maybe was enough to get them to stop, take a walk out, and then they come back and talk it out, and like that. And I thought that was a good insight. But also initially, for both of them to have that instinct to not want to hurt the other is important, because sometimes, you might just want to lash out. You want to be able to get to a point where you can control that sort of thing, because that can do so much damage that it would be hard to come back from if it's done repeatedly and never actually dealt with in a relationship of any kind, friendship, with spouses or in families. In families, it gets even more difficult, I think. But
if you have that respect for each other, that you wouldn't want to embarrass the other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In other words, you wouldn't want them to hear about you doing this or doing that or whatever. That would be so embarrassing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you never do anything like that. And that's the thing with Jesus. We're ambassadors. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be doing things that embarrass the King.
Mm-hmm.
True.
That's true. That's true.
Well, we're getting near the end. But was there anything else that you had on your mind today? Oh, you were going to tell us that Christmas story, if you could remember it.
I'm trying to think. I remember one really great Christmas was my younger sister. It was great in a sense. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of giving someone exactly what they wanted, and them not dreaming they would actually get the gift. Like, they were convinced it would never actually happen. Some outlandish thing. There was this particular thing my younger sister wanted. I remember working really hard, and I found this thing, and I got got it mailed over from Europe or something. It wasn't a big thing, but I knew she had wanted it. She just never would have dreamed that it was going to happen. When she opened the box, I mean, it was just, but the experience. Yeah, and I've reflected on that in the past, and I thought, wow, that must be. It's such a wonderful feeling to see somebody so thrilled in receiving, something that they wanted very much. And you kind of hope as you go on the spiritual life that you have trained your will to desire the right things, and how pleasing it must be for God to give you those right things that He wants for you, that you now want what He wants for you, right? And in the end, that's just to have life with Him forever. I mean, that's it. That's what we're called to. And it must be so, if you can say this to be, He desires this so much for His creatures that He's made for Himself, that they now actually do want the very thing for which they have been created. Must be, if you can say, wholly satisfying to the Lord.
Yeah.
But that gave me a little bit of a sense of just what a wonderful feeling it is, to give someone a gift like that and have them just absolutely be thrilled. I mean, it's a great feeling, and desire to make somebody happy, even if it is something, material or whatever. But sometimes those things can take on great meaning also. They can be assumed up into our affective lives, our spiritual lives as well. But the look of joy of someone, and parents must feel this all the time. They pretend they're not going to actually, the kid's not going to get what they really want, and then there it is on Christmas Day, and you hope they don't forget about it 5 minutes later. They might, but that moment is just precious, isn't it?
Really? Well, I have two little stories here to close. One is that one year I came up with this idea because we were all there to have Christmas dinner, And I said, well, this year we're going to draw names. Oh, yeah, that's fun, drawing names. Yeah, okay. Yeah, but when you draw somebody's name, then you have to forgive them for something they did to you.
Ooh.
That,
how did that go over?
Actually, it went over pretty well.
Did it? Did it really?
But then with the little kids, we used to sing all the time, getting ready for Christmas and the Christmas carols. And I got a book this one year from this man, and it was a Christmas songbook, and on one page it had the music, and then the other page it had a picture. Like if you're going to sing Little Town of Bethlehem, then there was a picture of the little town of Bethlehem on the right side. Okay, so you had the song, you had the little town of Bethlehem. So we're singing the song, and it was, "Oh, come, let us adore Him," right? We're singing this song, "Oh, come, let us adore Him," and there's a picture. I forget what the picture was. But after we got all done, one of my little daughters said, she must have been 5 years old or something. She says, "Dad," she says, "I can't find the letters." Oh, come, let us, oh, come, let us adore Him. That was precious.
That's
You never forget something like that, huh?
Oh, I know it.
Wow.
And that reminds me, I meant to mention earlier, I was invited to a concert yesterday by the seminarians at the Pontifical North American College, and it was just beautiful. I want to put a plug in for them. It was just wonderful. It was some Advent songs and Christmas carols, and some of them, everyone there was invited to sing along with, but they did such a wonderful job. There was so much work that went into it. I was so glad I got to go and hear it. They really did a fantastic job, and all the work. And one of the last ones they sang, Manu Mysterium, it was a beautiful modern arrangement that had its very interesting harmonies. And I was just thoroughly impressed with how the tenors, who had these lines that just flew up into the stratosphere, did such a great job after singing for an hour, and they must have been just tired at that point, their voices. Oh, was it wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. It was great.
Beautiful.
Because I go to class with a lot of them too, so it was nice to see them. I thought, oh, they're my classmates are singing. It was great. It was beautiful.
Well, I think it was St. Anthony that said, we teach with our words, we preach with our lives. So this Christmas, let's make it a point to preach with our lives more. It's good to talk about these things and put these things out and teach these things, but we got to live them too. We got to live our baptism. We got to live our baptisms, as someone once said.
Absolutely, in the everyday, in the ordinary everyday, which is not always easy.
So thank you, Natalia, and
thank you.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year,
and
just have a blessed time there in Rome. I know you will.
I will.
And we thank you, Father, for this time together. We thank you for Natalia. We thank you for all the beautiful things we talked about today. And we look forward to our next meeting. Home sweet home. Home sweet Rome. Rome. So in the meantime, everybody, God bless all of you in Jesus' name.
Bless. Amen. Amen. Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.